So yes, I'm Annette from the Economics Department. I teach mainly on the Stage 1 papers. The paper that I principally teach is certain semesters of Econ 101. Thank you. Alright, so this one, okay, good. See how it worked. Okay, so you can see the title of my presentation, Avoiding the Yawn. So I use these learning session activities to try to stop yawning, or at least for the students to stop yawning. So you might have seen this, maybe this resonates with you in some of your lectures. It certainly did with mine. And you see this a lot. So there has been some research taken on people's inattention at lectures, and they use some rather interesting techniques, often just observation of students. Now I always can tell that students are starting to yawn because you start seeing a few open mouths. So as you go around, you sort of see, every now and then somebody's mouth is open. Okay, so we tend to sort of think, well, maybe it's us. Okay, well, what are we doing wrong? All right. Maybe it's that. I get a lot of that. Okay. Or we think, oh, maybe it's them, they're, yeah, I'm sure it's them. Yeah, and I do think actually it's a combination of both. Okay, we do put a lot of pressure on students. They do get very tired. They do have a lot of other things that distract them. So when you're talking to them, yeah, they can probably think this is the less interesting of the things I could be paying attention to. Okay, and yeah, we do see that students find that there's a lot of pressure at certain times and our lecture attendance goes down, or else you get a lot less attention during the lectures. So I think it is a combination of a few things, and of course what we have the most control over is our teaching. Okay, so let's remember what I was going to say next. In economics, what do we do right or wrong? So what do we do in a typical lecture? Well, a typical lecture in economics sort of looks like this, and these are just grabs of slides that we have in a lecture, just a small sequence of slides. So you'll show them some graphs and you'll explain it, so there's a lot of wonk, wonk, wonk going on, right? That's the graph that they'll be looking at in their books, okay? Oh, then they get another one and then you'll be talking about that. Okay, then you'll have a table which actually has a lot of information in it, but it's all summarised like that. And of course you can see in students' minds they're saying, right, memorise this. Okay, then you'll show them some equations and there'll be some explanations. There's a combination of quite a lot of stuff that we do in lectures, but it's all showing. We're showing them what we're doing. We're not actually getting them to work with it in lectures. So what they're doing, and I don't know if, I sort of have this idea of tomorrow's Annette. So I leave a lot of jobs for tomorrow's Annette. Tomorrow's Annette's going to do that, right? So that's exactly what we find with students. They think, I'll pay attention to this later. Okay, I've seen all of this, right? Just write down what the lecturer is saying so I don't miss out on things, and then I'll put my mind onto it later and see what it actually means. Typical assessment in economics, of course, is all applied. So rather than just repeating, elasticity is blah, 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 they have to actually apply it to a particular case. Okay, so these are some multi-choice questions. Sometimes they'll actually have to do some calculations, other times they're interpreting numbers. Okay, and then we encapsulate it all in these sort of short answer questions where they actually have to recreate graphs, but of course they're using new figures, etc. So there's quite a lot of stuff that's applied that they have to do that they don't get to do in lectures. We do the application in the lectures. We might show them a worked example, but that's about it. Okay, so what do we get from students? Typical feedback, and I don't think it's we're alone in economics, but this is pretty much how it goes. More practice questions, more past exam answers, more worked examples, more practice tests with answers, please. This is actually feedback from the formative feedback questionnaires, the hard copies we used to have. More questions with worked answers, more exam type questions and answers, more practice, more practice, more practice. Okay, that's what they want. Alright, so what did we do to solve this? Well, we had tutorials, okay? So we thought, right, let's listen to the feedback that students have said, and let's put some past exams in tutorials. So tutorials did used to have a lot of application, but they were a little bit more about working with little chunks of the material. But no, let's put these past exam questions in tutorials. That's actually one of the big feedbacks we used to get from students. What did we get from students when we did this? Thank you, tutorials are very helpful. Please make tutorials worth marks. And can we have more past exam questions in tutorials? So, what is the problem with this? Well, you put as many past exam questions in as you can. However, what you do find is logistically, tutorials have to lag lectures by often more than a week, up to 1 week is the typical lag. Okay, so what's happening is students are not actually working with the material as they're learning it, they're working with it with a sufficient lag, and so they tend to encapsulate it and think of it as this is stuff that's going to prepare me for the test and exam. Okay, which means that you focus on teaching to the assessment. They start to think of it as practice for my testing exam. That's what a tutorial is, right? It's just practice. Okay, and of course, the big casualty when we wanted to put in these past exam questions is the discussion questions. So those are the ones that we ripped out, because those are the ones that students were typically saying, what's the point of me doing this when it's not going to be in the exam? And tutorials are about helping me practice for the exam. So what else did we do? We also gave them answers to 2 past exams, fully worked everything. Okay. What was the feedback from students? Thanks for the answers to the 2 past exams. Can we have answers to more past exams? What's the problem with this? Why not just provide a full suite of every single past exam? We just provide the answers to every single, of the probably 25 that are on the library's website. We just provide answers to them. Well, we did find this actual unintended consequence. We thought that mostly people wanted to see the past exam answers for the application calculation questions. A lot of them actually started looking at the explanation questions and feeling tempted to memorise those answers. And it didn't really solve the problem. So providing 2 past exam answers just led you to being asked for more past exam answers. And there's something else that I particularly feel about this. Economics, you need to understand what you're doing and why. It's not just about practice. And every past exam that you practice is a little bit less time spent on actually engaging with the material. So what happens, if you make a question different in in this semester's past exam, in this semester's actual exam, of course, if students are focused on memorising or just going through past exams, that's how they've learnt the paper, you're going to find they'll really suffer. Okay, so their grade will drop a lot. And you also find, so I've been told by this by a lecturer down at another university who does provide the past exam answers, he said every semester, straight after the exam, the students will come and complain to him, this semester's exam was much harder than all the previous ones. And he said to them, no, you just had the answers to the previous exams when you were working through them. Okay, so we certainly don't want to just get in the habit of providing so much practice that that's what they see economics is about. Just solve these problems and then you finish that course and get on with your life. Okay, so why not change the assessment? Okay, so if we're, why have all these applied questions? Well, it kind of comes down to the signature pedagogy of economics. So, in looking at Schulman's paper, 2005, he describes this engineering lecture where there's a lot of scribbling on the board and the students kind of have to copy it down, and it's all about solving problems, and economics is very much like that. And it comes from the idea that we actually want to instill in students, or good economists, we want them to have this kind of capability for abstraction, for modelling, and you've got to manipulate models, work with models and apply given cases to models in order to be able to do that. So we can't really get away from the applied side in the assessment. Okay, so why not change the teaching? And that's indeed what I thought was necessary, and that's the thing we can work with. Okay, so when students are solving the economic problems, they see this, we'll have a worked example, but most people don't read mathematics, okay? Gauss, Euler, they were, people who were able to read mathematics and write mathematics, like other people write novels. But most people don't read mathematics, so seeing a worked example doesn't really work. They need to be able to actually apply the theory straight away. But before they do that, they need to know what they're doing and why. So we can't just have practice. We can't say, let's just make this entirely tutorial-based. They need to actually say, well, what am I actually doing? When I get this model, what does it actually mean? Otherwise, economics is actually meaningless and it just degenerates down to a few mathematical techniques. Mathematics, of course, is not meaningless, but I'm saying we're not getting any meaning from those techniques in an economic sense. Okay. We found that the 3 times lecture, well I found, that 3 times lecture plus 1 times tutorial structure didn't work to do this. What it did, apart from making tutorials seeming a lot like just practicing for the exam, what the 1 times tutorial structure does is encapsulate the applied and say it's only this one part of what you do. So we're going to do all of this theory, and the applied is this thing that you'll do at this one point. But actually, the best way to learn the theory is to apply it straight away. Okay, they need to put their knowledge straight into practice. And I wanted them to stop yawning. Okay, so what did I do? So I introduced these learning session activities, which meant that as we're working through the material, you'll actually go and do an activity related to the material. Okay, so and you do it at certain points in the material. So you don't just wait till a subtopic is finished or the whole topic is finished and say, now let's do a practice exam related to that. Because once again, you're encapsulating the applied and putting it distinct from the theory. Okay, I put them in the course notes, so I would provide fully written course notes that they could read through, and then they could do the learning session activity. I let them do that. I wanted them to have them prior to class. Not all students work in that time-pressured framework, and remember, learning session activities are not about practicing for the exam, so they are about actually learning the material. So students who liked to have a while to kind of digest the material and try it beforehand could try them before class. Not that many students did. They actually liked to wait till they got into class. Okay, we could have calculation based, that's kind of like, solve this problem, find equilibrium, that kind of thing. Or they could be discussion based, and class is really the best place for discussion based problems. And I hoped, and I found it was pretty easy to circulate the class depending on the size. So I started this off in summer school where I had 45 students. That was really easy to circulate the class. I found even with 200 students, I was able to still go and talk to small groups while they were doing the learning session activity. And what that meant is that the students could feel, well, I better do something, right? Because the lecturer might just pop over my shoulder. And it did allow me to help groups of students, but also see how they were going. I could actually start to tell which students were really struggling with the material because they couldn't even start the question. That gave you the ability to say, I think you might need to come to my office hour. And you built up a little bit of rapport with them, so they actually felt like they knew you, and they could come to your office hour. Students actually did them. So I thought, oh, that'll be the problem. They'll just sit there waiting for the answers. Actually, they get down and work with it. And the reason why, I speculate, the reason why, is because the students who come to class are actually there for learning. So the ones who really just want to go and text and, post things on Instagram and that kind of thing, they're not going to be the ones who are in class. Okay? If there's something else you want to be doing, you won't bother coming to class these days with lecture recordings. So the students who are in class are actually well motivated, and they did work on the learning session activities. It gave them something to do in the class. So I'll give you some examples of how they actually came about. So this is something that you've probably all heard about in economics. It gets a bad name, rational self-interest and the invisible hand. Okay, so this is something that students frequently misinterpret. Because what they do, they think rational self-interest, okay, so that means that you only pursue your material well-being. If it doesn't help me in terms of giving me more money, I'm not going to do it. And I've actually seen this, you see this propagated through the media and that kind of thing. Okay, so what I gave them was an activity to think about some examples of non-self-interested behaviour, and were they rational? And what we found is you talk to students, they start to get the nuance of the idea of rational self-interest. So they come up with ideas. Oh, I paid for my friend's dinner when he forgot his wallet. And we were able to look at that, bring that to the class. So I'd go around and I'd talk to them, and some of them would submit ideas, and then I'd come back down to the class and we'd discuss those ideas with the entire class. The students were actually able to tease out, well, how did it help you? Things like reciprocity. Maybe you were maybe you're hoping that he would pay you back at some point, or at least if you forgot your wallet, he'd be helping you out. It made you feel good. So we started to talk about those things that actually do help you, but a lot of students don't see as being self-interested, because self-interest in that sense has a bad name. So you need the class discussion forum to be able to do that. So even giving students this activity as a thought exercise, which you see in a textbook, they still don't get the ideas, right? So they still, you can't really tease them out. So class is a great place for talking about those kind of difficult concepts. Okay, this is an emotive question. So this is something that, so this is an outcome efficiency says given the low incomes of the poor, free exchange and networks to do the best they can. So if you just see that as, then this is how the textbook had it, this is how you see the slide. And what you want them to do is actually start looking at these things and think, well, what do I think about that? What does that mean? Does that mean that these things are the best outcome? Or does that mean that there's something else that we should be doing? So that's when students get involved in these kind of discussions, the energy really lifts because they start really thinking about these concepts. Okay, once again, if I was just talking about it, I don't think that they'd pay that much attention or think it, or all of them wouldn't really get the point of view. Okay, and then of course we do have these guys, the old, number crunching. And that is really useful in the lecture environment too, because what we want them to do is to actually solve these kinds of problems and see very early if they can't do it. And that's exactly what we found, is that students would start saying, well, I know that now I can't solve this problem well in advance of when I'm going to have to solve it in a test or an exam. Okay. And of course you can still walk around and talk to students at that point. Sometimes you can actually help them start, set this equal to that. Now see what happens. Okay, so how did I implement them? So I realised in the program, okay, that I talk about having them at every 10 to 15 minutes. That's actually not correct. They weren't at every 10 to 15 minutes. You put them at natural breaks in the material, or when there's this part of a topic that you think, I really think they need to apply this, or else when we're moving on, they're not going to get this. Have around 2 to 3 per lecture, and spacing is variable, so irregularity can actually help. So this particular article, Munoz, Luna, and Jurado, Navas, I think it is, they came up with the idea with these routine breakers. So having them routinized is not actually the best idea. Say, okay, every 10 minutes we stop and we do a learning session activity. You actually want to have them at, to some extent irregular. Some lectures can have more, some lectures can have less. You keep students surprised. Having a read about this, this 10 to 15 minutes, there doesn't seem to be any really compelling evidence that students' attention spans are cycling every 10 minutes. It's actually seems to be a little bit of a legend that has emerged in the material. Okay, it is better to have more towards the end of the lecture because you find the activity level sort of drops. Okay, so good research has suggested that attention lapses actually become more frequent towards the end of that 50-minute lecture. So it is better to kind of wake them up towards the end of the lecture. And of course, doesn't everything work best with a flipped classroom? Well, this one does as well. So I did actually implement this at the same time as having pre-readings and trying to implement a flipped classroom as well. So what they did, they encouraged pre-reading prior to class because students wouldn't get or wouldn't want to be sort of embarrassed by not knowing how to answer the learning session activities. So that's how I implemented them. What are the outcomes? Well, I don't have a formal meter for this, but the class energy level did feel a lot like it lifted. Okay, so you do a learning session activity, particularly a discussion-based one, and you feel the energy go up as they were talking, and then afterwards there was kind of this nice refreshment. I definitely use them to inform my own notes and my own class discussions. So the students' feedback from them, did they understand what I was asking for in a learning session activity? Could I make that one better? Or some students would come up with new ideas I hadn't thought about, and I'd think, okay, that's a good thing to include. I'll go and do a little bit of research on that and see how I can place that one back into the lecture and discuss that in a sort of formal context. They did get well reviewed, so certainly no one complained about them, and they did say that that was one of the things that they found helpful in as part of the lecture. And I was very surprised that no one asks for the formal written answers, which I thought that would be, the one of the first requests I got. In fact, it does encourage them to work with the lecture recordings a little bit more interactively, because they can get them on the lecture recordings, and if they haven't attended the lecture, they will need to actually go through the lecture recording and write down the answers if they're interested in having the answers. And finally, they stopped asking for practice questions. So I stopped getting this request because we had so many interspersed with the material that they were actually interacting with them. Consequently, I think it's valuable for us to do a learning session activity. So what I want you to do is get into groups of the people that you most want to talk to. Okay, so it can be 5 people or 10 people, depending on how many people you really want to talk to. Okay, and discuss, can you use learning session activity structure in your classes? What might be the advantages they bring to your class, but also what are the challenges that you think you would face, and how might you resolve these if possible? And I will circulate, so have a chat, I will circulate. Now I want to get some of your feedback. So what you would have seen is that obviously I don't get to talk to everybody. So typically one of the things that you do is, you mix it up. If you're doing 2 or 3 in a lecture, you will get to talk to different groups for different learning session activities. It's not full omniscience, we don't have that. But obviously some of you would have come up with some ideas of whether or not you could use these, and maybe I think what we could discuss is the challenges. So some of you probably have some questions. What challenges would I face? I couldn't do this because. So Alex, did you have something?
I think it's really good, and we need to adopt it in stage 1, commercial law. How do you, like you just see right now, it took you a good minute or 2 minutes to get people's attention, so how do you get that back?
I think it's also practice, practice on the part of the class. So yes, at the beginning they're talking a little bit, but actually I found it quietens down really, really quickly, especially as the semester progresses. Yeah.
Okay, but did you flash the light or whatever, or just say, yes, stop?
No, usually I get the lectern mic, because I think it's a little bit louder than this guy, and just say, okay everybody. And they tend to close down.
Okay, so with tutorials, are they just what you've always done?
So what I ended up doing with my tutorials is saying these are your big discussion questions. So I could actually take those practices out of the tutorials, or a lot of them. So I'd usually have one practice type question, one working through the material, and the other was a really kind of interesting real world engagement question that a tutor could work in a small group.
So it wasn't answering old exam questions?
No, I could do that when I was doing this structure. That's exactly what I did. I completely deleted all the old tutorials and made them completely new. Yes.
Sounds very interesting. I've got 2 questions for you. First one, people are talking about when they're teaching content heavy, right? They have to cover a lot of subject. How do you manage to do the practice, to have deep learning way and without cutting too much your content?
So they are learning, though. That's the thing. The learning session activity is actually about learning, not about practice. I was talking about this with Alan. So it's about getting them to learn the material in this framework, so they're not test technique. There will be the odd not past test, but the odd test type question or exam type question, but it's actually about getting them to engage with the material. So a lot of us have a fear, right? We have to give up control of a lot of time in our class to have learning session activities. How do you know you're controlling what students are actually learning when they're sitting there and you're blabbing at them? Oh, sorry. Talking to them. But that was the fear I had. I thought, I don't really know what they're paying attention to. They might be missing a lot of what I say. I try to listen to my own lecture recordings, and then I tried to listen to other people's, thinking, well, maybe there's a reason I keep skipping through mine. But it's really hard to listen to the full lecture recording and actually take down everything that is being said in some way, or engage with it in some way. So learning session activities, it's about learning, and yes, you're giving up some time for them, but it should be learning based. And I don't think that you're actually losing content time, but it does, as I said, work with flipped learning. You have to give them a good, some people use a textbook, I just have my written materials.
In terms of flipped learning, you say you encourage them to do pre-reading. How do you encourage them?
Well,
it's quite kind of...
That's a real challenge. So a lot of them don't do it, it depends on how you structure your lectures. So the more you expect that knowledge already, the more you tend to kind of just summarise material as opposed to going through slide by slide, the more they will start doing the pre-readings because they'll miss out otherwise. But that takes a lot of guts, I think, to actually do that. Yeah.
I think it's a good idea to try these learning sessions in the lecture. I have difficulty trying to implement that because we have in the GSM that I teach, where I teach, we have a 1.5 hour lecture which intends to cover everything, the contents quite intensively, and then a 2-hour tutorial and a 2-hour team-based learning session, and that is a 10-week quarter. So I find it very difficult to try to integrate these learning sessions into the lecture when you have so much time. In fact, far more time for practice in the tutorial.
You're already sort of doing it. Yeah.
Sorry?
You're already sort of doing it if you're doing it in the TBL.
Yeah.
So I guess the only thing is, do you like to encapsulate the material in the tutorial format, that application, or do you think that the lecture could actually be interspersed, and could you use those 6 hours that you mentioned in a different way? So could you say, let's do material, then practice, then that kind of thing, and then some more material and then practice, or does it work better for you to encapsulate it? So is there a reason for that? Is it a resource or?
Because we have GTAs doing some of it, so otherwise you don't want to do the full yourself.
Yeah, that is something. One way to kind of get around it is to have more like GTA, I guess, presence, or I think the organisation. Yeah, if you want to do your 2 hours and get them over with, then that might be an issue. Yeah. All right, Tessa. I think I have to finish.
I think we're going to have to. It's time. Thanks again. That was brilliant.